Is Richard Johnson, who's a lecturer in U.S. politics at the Queen Mary University of London. Thanks so much for being here with us. So this has been called the most unpredictable leadership race in years. Are you surprised by the way it's gone and by the two candidates who are left in the race now?
I'm not terribly surprised by the two final candidates, but I think what's notable is that both of them got around just about a third of Conservative MPs' support. So in other words, two-thirds of Conservative MPs didn't want either of the final two candidates. It's very different from Boris Johnson, who got two-thirds support from Conservative MPs. Liz Truss is leading among Conservative Party members in the country, according to polling. But I think that her support could be fairly soft. I think that this is a campaign where the campaign will matter and the candidates need to prove themselves. And you could see some significant swinging in the polls over the next few weeks, I think.
Yeah, so tell me about that then. What happens now concretely? What will the candidates be busy doing to sort of get themselves over the line here?
So we don't know how many Conservative Party members there are. That's kept secret by the Conservative Party. They don't release a lot of information about their supporters, but we estimate there's probably about 150 to 200,000, as you said, card-carrying members of the Conservative Party. These are now the selectorate who will choose their party leader and therefore the Prime Minister of this country. And so Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss will spend the summer going to different Conservative associations up and down the country, sending out MPs who support them to speak on their behalf in all the different constituencies of the United Kingdom. On top of that, there will be some debates, televised debates. And this is where I think Liz Truss could run into some trouble. She didn't do very well at all in the previous two televised debates when the MPs were voting. She came last and second to last in the polls about who won those debates. And even though she's the front runner right now, I think if she tanks in the upcoming televised debates, that could spell real trouble for her.
You spoke about the high proportion of party members who didn't vote for either candidate. I mean, this leadership contest seems to have exposed very deep divisions in the party. Explain why that is, and do you think that will change once the leader is chosen?
I think one of the reasons why Boris Johnson stayed Prime Minister as long as he did was because there was an absence of a clear alternative. There was no real heir apparent waiting in the wings, as sometimes there is at various junctures in British politics. And it's clear that although Conservative MPs had concluded Boris Johnson needed to go, they haven't decided who should replace him. And I think that's going to be interesting because the signals then for party members are not so clear. There's a lot of discussion about how unrepresentative Conservative Party members are, and they are indeed unrepresentative of the wider electorate. However, they do show a tendency to want to win elections. The Conservatives are a very successful political party, and they'll often take signals from their own MPs about who they think is most viable, one who can win elections. And this time, those clear signals are not as apparent. And that's why I think that the support that the candidates currently have among members is pretty soft. They need to prove themselves that they're good campaigners and they can go out into the country and win support.
Well, turning to Boris Johnson now, I mean, his shadow looms large over all of this. What part, if any, do you think he will play sort of within the party throughout this and more broadly in British politics going forward?
In the immediate term, I suspect he will probably refrain from making any public statements about either candidate so as not to be overly divisive in that. I think one of the things that's so interesting is, of course, these two candidates are not really major change candidates. They were both the most senior members of Boris Johnson's own cabinet. So it's not like you've got a really clear anti-Boris and a pro-Boris candidate. Both of them ultimately were happy to serve in his government until very recently, at least. In terms of Boris's longer future, I would be surprised if he stayed an MP for the rest of the parliament. I could see him resigning his seat and perhaps going on the speaking circuit, maybe selling some books. He's a celebrity as well as a politician, and I think that he will probably try to milk what he can from that, as other former prime ministers have, to be fair.
Yeah, certainly don't expect him to disappear from the public eye. Richard Johnson in London, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.